the legendary Eleanor of Aquitaine. When it comes to great queens, few come close. Her marriage to a duke 11 years younger created a power couple unequalled. She is the mother of two of the most famous kings in history. Her story is one of chivalry, romance, dedication and defiance. She is no kept woman, and her actions against her tyrannical husband would incur a king's wrath. This is her story.
Oh, I'll check the playlist.
Oh, he's learning.
Playlists are fun!
It is hard to imagine, with our modern hindsight, that Eleanor and her household would be in so much of a religious pickle in the early years of the 1140s. We're more familiar with the God-fearing woman residing at Fontevraud in Chinon than this impetuous young woman we have been dealing with so far, who, along with her equally raucous sister, appears to be treating the French royal court like a 1970s sorority house. Things are going from bad to worse, and following a quarrel with the church over the appointment of a bishop, Louis, the King of France, has avoided excommunication but finds his entire household under a religious interdict, imposed by Pope Innocent II, meaning the sacraments of the church are barred, until they have proven they can change their ways. In a nutshell, for the royal family, the church is on strike. And there's more, as the controversial marriage between Eleanor's sister Petronilla to the recently single Raoul, Count of Vermandois, has got the two lovebirds excommunicated, plus all the bishops involved in the scandal. Yep, the church itself is not immune to excommunication and religious interdicts. Oh, and in case you're wondering about where Saint Bernard stood on this, you probably guessed it right. He supports the Pope. The problem is, this method just doesn't work. Count Royal and Petronilla are in love and simply will not separate. She will live the rest of her life with him. They will have children. She's the Countess of Vermandois. What's more, the jilted ex-wife of the Count, another lady by the name of Eleanor, has a powerful brother, another Count, Theobald of Champagne. Now, if you followed last episode, he's the chap who refused to accompany Louis, King of France, on his war against Alfonso Jourdan, the Count of Toulouse. Yes, politically this is very messy indeed, and many fingers point at the machinations of Eleanor of Aquitaine. And yes, Aquitaine, not Aquitaine, because here in the first half of the series, I'm deliberately avoiding anglicising the names. I'm using French, albeit badly, as this is a French story, hence Guillaume the Conqueror and Geoffroy of Anjou and his son Henri. Now, English speakers would know them by different names. Geoffroy is Geoffrey Plantagenet, and Guillaume is William the Conqueror. Anyway, on with the show. Going back to the royal household, Eleanor's power has long been reined in, as Abbot Suger has already seen to that. Even so, her influence on the king was still very powerful, manipulating him from behind the scenes, leaving her to be accused of meddling and giving him really bad advice. There is no direct evidence she is meddling in current affairs though, and the king certainly doesn't accuse her of doing so. These are just accusations, but an event will occur that will turn the people, especially the clergy, more than ever against the Queen. As we know, the royal household is under a religious interdict. Louis, King of France, isn't the happiest bunny in the warren. He also finds out that Theobald of Champagne is harbouring Pierre, the very archbishop that Louis swore on sacred relics would never enter a Bourges cathedral. The feud between Louis and Pierre is the reason for the whole religious debacle, and Louis's wrath was brutal. We know how vicious he can be when he lopped off a man's hands for not appearing at the wedding. Now, Theobald of Champagne is about to feel the consequences of his actions. Louis had to act fast, as Theobald isn't known as Theobald the Great for no reason. He also has a large amount of territory, France being sandwiched between both of Theobald's domains. Blois and Champagne is the count of both, and it's Champagne where Louis prosecutes his war. Leaving Eleanor in Paris, the French king opens a military campaign of murder in the region, though not deliberately. His army, which consisted mainly of mercenaries, proved unruly from the start and began a dreadful slaughter of innocents, killing men, women, children indiscriminately. Appalling crimes were committed, and when Theobald didn't come begging for mercy to the king, Louis decided to siege the town of Vitry-en-Putois. Now, the local peasantry, upon seeing the advancing French mercenaries, had retreated behind the town walls, preparing defences. They were firing arrows back, keeping the French at bay. But the town walls were made of wood, and the French used flaming arrows to set the timber on fire, burning the town's walls in an inferno which spread across the town itself. Many perished in this awful assault, but the worst was yet to come, as the French mercenaries then entered and massacred all they came across. Houses were torched, people slain. The protests of the commanders fell on deaf ears as the atrocity continued. They could only look on, powerless, as these mercenaries pressed their evil work. A multitude of women, children and the elderly, over 1,000 people, had fled to the sanctuary of the cathedral, where they hoped to be safe, as no Christian would harm them there, huddling in fear as the massacre continued. But alas, the most holiest of places was burned to a cinder, and after the roof collapsed, there were no survivors in this cathedral. And for centuries, the town was known as Vitry-le-Brûlé, in memory of the fire. The problem with much of Eleanor's presence in France being absent is that we don't get any indication of her reaction to any of this. We simply do not know, but cannot imagine that she would be happy with the massacre. But the blame would come her way anyway. The whisperer behind the scenes, the she-wolf. And we also do not know Eleanor's reaction to her new husband, for after this event, Louis was a changed man. I'll explain before getting back to Eleanor. Right, the massacre. This was not Louis's design. He was not the architect of this horrid massacre. From over the hill where his camp lay, he could hear the screams of the innocent as they burned in the cathedral, and by the time his commanders arrived at camp to deliver the awful news and ask for more orders, they found the king in his tent, catatonic, shaking, terrified, unable to speak, his teeth chattering. The king wasn't even aware of his surroundings, nor the presence of his men. And the King of France would remain in this state for 2 days, even refusing to eat, shocked by what had occurred. He had ordered none of this, but he took the blame solely upon himself. He'd have nightmares, emotional breakdowns for years, all of the signs of what we'd recognise as PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. We're all human, all have the same DNA, suffer the same trauma. What affects us now affected us then. And do take in mind, it's not like the king can take confession or mass or any other religious sacraments that might ease his soul, as his household is under an interdict. He's cut off from the church and thus God. Although we don't know how Eleanor reacted to any of this, we do know that the shell-shocked Louis never blamed her for anything. Despite the accusations flying her way from men like Soden and Bernard of Clairvaux, Bernard being the worst, going as far as accusing her manipulations as the counsel of the devil. Louis returned to Paris immediately and made peace with Count Theobald, though on the condition that the excommunication of Petronilla and Raoul was lifted. This time it certainly feels like Eleanor's presence is behind this, whispering to the king in the bedchamber. But given that it's in the will of peace, Pope Innocent is willing to listen. As Saint Bernard of Clairvaux, an opponent to the controversial marriage, he even weighs in, agreeing with the king. Thus, the Pope, under pressure, agrees to lift the excommunication. But he had one stipulation, that upon lifting the excommunication, Petronilla would leave Raoul, who'd remain with his first wife. And guess what happens next? King Louis, once again enraged, gathers an army and invades Champagne for a second time. Once again, a massacre of innocents occurs. Louis has learned nothing. Saint Bernard even accuses him of taking the advice of the devil, a damning statement in the Middle Ages that would have made a rational man listen. But Louis wasn't rational, not now. Especially when it was clear that these devils that Bernard referred to were Eleanor, Petronilla and Raoul. But mainly Eleanor, who had the greatest influence on the king, who many saw at this point in time as a fool. And behind the scenes, there's evidence that the marriage is also being questioned. We even have a pedigree drawn up by the Bishop of Lyon, a man by the name of Bartholomew Le Jeu, who once blessed that controversial marriage between Petronilla and Raoul. But he's now claiming that the royal marriage between the king and the queen should be null and void on the grounds of consanguinity. That is, they were close relations, close enough to have the marriage annulled. To hell with her domains. This isn't true, but the issue is being raised, and Bernard of Clairvaux actually raises the matter twice. And the logic is sound. Why? As Bernard explains, King Louis agreed to the annulment between Eleanor of Champagne and Raoul of Vermandois because of consanguinity. Yet they were no more related to the king's own marriage to his own queen. Aha! Bernard has got him. Suger of Bernard and all other members of the clergy are trying to get the king to see reason. He's listening to bad advice, the silver tongue of the devil. They're writing letters to other advisors, accusing them also of bad advice. The clergy even decide to travel to the king's current residence at Corbeil and try to talk some sense into him. Not that this works, as the King of France flies into a rage. He only finally calms down and enters another state of depression when Saint Bernard leaves, accusing him further of listening to the advice of Satan. 1143 is a bad year. Pope Innocent II also passes away later that year, and Guido di Castello takes the position as Celestine II. And on Saint Bernard's advice, Celestine lifts the interdict on the royal household. He does it out of charity. Finally, things are going back to normal. Well, Petronilla and Royal were still excommunicated, but hey, the interdict is lifted. By 1144, even Eleanor and her rival, Adelaide, the Queen Dowager, seemed to be getting along, at least on the surface. Because on the 10th of June, the royal household make a pilgrimage to the abbey at Saint-Denis, Sudra's spanking new Gothic-style building that's getting consecrated. Many pilgrims were heading there, a large multitude that also included Saint Bernard. But it's not like they have to travel far, as the basilica itself is only in Paris. I mean, you can board and chalk it in 2.5 hours, you know? Still, it's the thought that counts. Upon arrival, the king naturally joined the monks in praying at the high altar, while the queen and the dowager were led by Abbot Suger to the nearby guest house, where they would be staying. Their only complaint was most likely about the heat, as this was a pretty hot period and this weekend was no exception. And the next day was a Sunday, and then the new abbey was dedicated by the two royals, the king and queen. It would have been a beautiful occasion. The abbey of Saint-Denis, which today we call the Basilica, would be the first true piece of Gothic architecture in Christendom, a style born in France, moulded by France. Architecturally, we're in a new era. Thus Eleanor would be the first queen to see in this Gothic era, that in 100 years' time would still be going strong, if not stronger. And if you remember that vase that Eleanor gave to Louis at the wedding, well, now Louis gives it to Abbot Suger to be kept at the abbey itself, along with the oriflamme, a legendary battle standard that was said to have once been carried by Charlemagne to the Holy Land. A joyous occasion. For the occasion, Queen Eleanor chose to wear a beautiful damask robe. Stunning! But the heat is getting to her, and she nearly fainted. Outside of that, everything was going smoothly, and the king, preferring to remain a changed man, spent much time with Saint Bernard of Clairvaux. Wise words were exchanged, but all focused on Eleanor, as she also sought out the future saint. Because something was on her mind, something troubling her. The two met in private, though we do know what was discussed. Chiefly her sister Petronilla. Eleanor wants Bernard to use his charms on the Pope, to lift the excommunication between the married couple. Eleanor offers a deal. She'll twist the arm of King Louis. He'll make peace with Count Theobald, and he'll recognise Archbishop Pierre. There, everybody's happy, right? Well, Bernard isn't good with women. He's never been good with women. The Virgin Mary is the only woman he trusts, the only one he doesn't shy away from. So now, in his middle years, this gaunt-looking bookish man is cautious with the young Occitan beauty in her early to mid-20s. And he has a reason to be, because there, in front of his eyes, he sees her for the very silver-tongued devil he had taken her for. Instead of agreeing to take a bite of Eve's apple, Bernard scorns her, gives her a right wigging. The way he sees it, she's led the king astray, plunged him into a world of sin. With that, he's said his piece. As for Eleanor, she bursts into tears. Now, we only have Bernard's word for this, so take it as you will, but according to him, She claims that she only meddles in politics because her life is empty, devoid. What was really on her mind was children. As she's been married to Louis for around 7 years by now, and her womb remains barren. All her life she's longed for a child, yet cannot conceive. Many nights she has prayed to the Virgin Mary, hoping she'll grant this one wish. If God the Most Holy can cure the blind and the deaf, cannot he grant this one miracle? Now, Bernard, as we learned last time, was a Mariologist, so this struck a chord. He's no longer scolding her, but talking to her in hushed tones. He reminds her that she has to stop living in sin, stop leading the king astray and against the church, be as God intended. Then Bernard himself promises he will bestow her a child. No, not like that. God, you lot. Okay, I'll rephrase that. And if she does so, then Bernard promises that he will talk to the Lord and ask him to bestow her a child. He's a holy man. He can perform miracles, hence one day he'll become a saint. And this works, because the next year, Eleanor gives birth to a baby girl. But let's explore this. Eleanor has been married for 7 years. Her and Louis have been trying for a baby, to continue the royal line, for 7 years. But outside of a miscarriage, there had been nothing. Okay, fine. We can take the easy way out. We can accuse her of having an affair. And there are a couple of contenders, and I'll get to them in a minute. She could have had a baby by them. And we can accuse Louis of not being very good in that department. But one day he'll father quite a brood. He'll continue the Capetian dynasty. And it will last for centuries. And Eleanor will have many other children, one after the other. So, again, make of it what you will. But the religious, superstitious mindset of the 12th century knew exactly what had occurred, because Saint Bernard of Clairvaux, he's already performed miracles in the eyes of the church. He makes dumb men speak. He makes blind men see. And you can argue that this was one of their miracles. Or maybe it's a more scientific explanation. Who knows? For all we know, it just could be absolutely coincidental. There could be many factors at play here. Anyway, back in the world of the mundane. Right now, there are some things to wrap up, and wrapped up they were. Because, as if by magic, well, an intervention moment by Bernard and Abbot Suger, there was a truce later that day between the king and Count Theobald. Louis even returns all the land he nicked during the war, and Pierre was recognised as the Archbishop of Bourges. Before long, the excommunication of Petronilla and Royal was voided, and the marriage recognised in the name of the Church. All is finally legal. And King Louis then decides to take the sacred Oriflamme to the Holy Land. It means a lot to him, because this is a childhood oath that he swore to his dead brother Philip, that the standard belongs at the Holy Sepulchre, the tomb of Christ, in Jerusalem. It would be a regular pilgrimage to the lands of what the Christians had named Terra Sancta, or the Holy Land. Others call it Outremer. It's pretty much 4 states that made up the region we call the Levant. And these states are Jerusalem, Tripoli, Antioch, and Edessa. The king planning to follow the routes of the many pilgrims who flocked to the city of Jerusalem, which, as of 1144, was a Christian state, like the other 3. Originally this had not been the case, but a crusade had crushed the various Islamic factions, and Jerusalem had been conquered by the Christian forces. Following the crusade, things had calmed down somewhat. Sure, it was still dangerous for pilgrims, and several powerful knightly orders had emerged to give them safe passage, but a direct Islamic assault on Jerusalem was very far-fetched indeed. Regional politics were changing, and the routes were growing more dangerous than before. Still, nothing that the knightly entourage of the French king could not handle. So Louis's plan is thus. While he's away delivering the sacred banner, Eleanor, who's pregnant by now, would stay behind to be free to do what she so wished. Now, Eleanor, who, as I said, was pregnant at this point in time, and most likely worried sick that something awful might happen, spoiler alert, the baby's fine, invites over to Paris a friend she's known since childhood, a troubadour from Gascony named Macabre. He's very famous in the era, especially in his homeland of Gascony and Aquitaine, the Queen's courts of love. This is the equivalent of inviting, say, Bernard Manning or Benny Hill over to the royal palace, because he's quite a scallywag. We know very little about him though, but this tale is one of his exploits, and gives an insight into his character, because he's supposed to be singing what the other cleaner troubadours would sing. Some songs about forlorn women, with love just out of reach, with a little bit of double entendre to get people giggling. Or a poem or monologue, where he gives his affections to an ambiguous and unobtainable woman. Well, that's not what happened. Far from it. Macabre is writing some very flirtatious lyrics to his songs, involving the Queen herself, very intimate, and apparently very degrading to women from the French point of view. Songs so shocking that King Louis is not happy. Though Eleanor herself would have found him hilarious. She's absolutely familiar with this kind of humour. Yes, she's been a good girl at the moment, and finally in the good books with Suger and Bernard. But the old Eleanor must have slipped out for a while, as the king gets very jealous, especially with the lyrics of the songs, which involve familiarity with Eleanor, if you get my drift. And given what we know about the baldiness of the troubadours, whew, I bet there were some whoppers. Eleanor doesn't fancy him back, but try telling the king that. So Louis, in a fit of rage, banishes the poor man from the kingdom. He doesn't even know what he's done. The French do not record what Eleanor thought of this, though I doubt she'd be happy. Yet this is not the first time, nor the last, that Eleanor would be involved in a scandal of a sexual nature. In this case, it's most likely the French not getting the provincial humour. But other cases? Men like the dashing Raymond de Poitiers, her uncle twice her age, or Geoffroy of Anjou, the husband of Empress Matilda. It gets to the point where you're stretched to let Eleanor off the hook, you know? But while the king is sulking in jealousy, come Christmas, all their plans were shattered by some earth-shocking news coming from the east. News was sweeping across Europe that Islamic forces, led by the governor of Iraq, a Seljuk Turk by the name of Zengi, had captured the lightly defended city of Edessa. What's more, the Islamic forces had massacred most of the population in a bloody rampage. Yes, massacre was not the plan. Like Louis before, Zengi had tried his hardest to stop his men from committing the atrocity. But the massacre happened anyway, and now an archbishop was dead. And it's not like Zengi is satisfied, as he now attacks several other cities. The state of Edessa has fallen. Those who escaped the slaughter were now refugees, entering nearby Antioch. And Zengi has Antioch in his sights. He turned his armies southward. These were dark times indeed, and anger was breaking out all over Christendom, fueled by priests denouncing the event from their pulpits. As of 1145, there is already talk of a new crusade, similar to the last one, a second crusade, just enough to drive the Seljuk Turks from the Holy Lands. However, remember Pope Celestine II? Well, he's already passed away, lasting only around a year. We've now got Pope Eugenius III. But he's absolutely useless, as he's too wrapped up in local politics and trying to save his career, because the schism is still ongoing. So it quickly becomes clear that no aid is coming unless something is done. Louis, King of France, looks to be the one stepping up to the challenge. This is the perfect excuse he wanted. He will take the sacred banner of the Oriflamme to Jerusalem. But he's not taking it in battle, but pilgrimage, and not to Edessa, but Jerusalem, because he's hoping to clear his soul of all his sins. The screams of the innocent in that cathedral still fresh in his mind. Louis was no warrior. Unfortunately, he was no longer the large muscular man he was in his youth. Sure, he was still young, but he lived frugally. He fasted 3 days a week. He suffered from PTSD. He wore a hair shirt beneath his garments as a penance. He's physically weak. He's not in any shape to don chain and pick up a sword and face the armies of Zengi. He's a priest, not a warrior. During this time, Eleanor is also not doing much, as she's heavily pregnant with her first baby, who is born that year, 1145. A girl named Marie, the miracle baby, named after the Mother of God herself. So we can forgive Eleanor for taking a break following her churching ceremony, which was where women were blessed and pampered following childbirth, then given time to recover. I think we can forgive her for taking a break. The only thing lowering the mood in Paris was that the child was a girl, as French customs forbade women from ever inheriting the throne. Eleanor still needed a boy, but right now she's holding a miracle in her arms. To the devil with the customs. And with the king shifting between melancholy and self-loathing, Eleanor must have regretted her choice to retire from public life. Yes, she had a baby, but that never stopped Adelaide or Matilda of Flanders. They powered on. Eleanor was no kept woman. It was simply not in her nature. However, play the good wife she must. It was a promise she had given to Saint Bernard. It was why she held a miracle in her arms. But on the horizon, a new crusade is brewing, and Eleanor will do something that will shock France. Because when the crusade goes underway, she will take the cross, the first queen ever to accompany a king in the Holy Land. And she'll take her entourage with her.